This video covers the IGCSE Biology Objective 3.1.5 on the 2025 CAIE syllabus to investigate the factors that influence diffusion. So let's take a look at the overview of the factors that influence diffusion. And so in this case, we are talking about distance, the distance that the molecule has to travel, the concentration gradient, what is the difference between the high and low concentrations, the temperature of the environment, and the surface area, the actual area that the molecules have to diffuse across. So we're going to look at each of these four areas in detail, so that way we can understand how these factors influence diffusion. So let's just talk about distance. So here we have point A to point B, just utilizing this little dash to represent time. And so if point A is closer to point B, it will only take 8 seconds to move, versus point A being further away from point B will take 16 seconds to move. I think that this one is pretty self-explanatory. We just know it takes longer to get to a place that's further away. So how does this play out biologically? The longer the distance and the more material that a molecule has to pass through will now slow down the rate of diffusion. So this is a picture of the alveoli next to a capillary, and we can see that the oxygen and the carbon dioxide molecules each only have 2 cells that they have to diffuse through in order to get to the respective location. So in this case, the oxygen is going to dissolve in a moisture layer in the alveoli, diffuse through the alveoli wall cell, and then diffuse through the capillary wall cell, and then be pumped away on a red blood cell. In the same way, just conversely, the carbon dioxide, which already is dissolved in the blood plasma, will move through the capillary cell wall, through the alveoli cell wall, and then will be converted into a gas molecule so it can be exhaled out of the body. So now if the molecules had, let's say, 4 or 5 layers of cells to pass through instead of just the 2, now the rate of diffusion would be slower. So the distance there is very important when we're talking about getting enough oxygen into the blood and getting the carbon dioxide out quickly. Our second factor is the concentration gradient. So in this example where we have a certain number of molecules on one side of the membrane, in this case 10, versus 4 on the other side of the membrane, we have a low gradient or a low slope. And in this case, we can compare it to a slide that a child would slide down. They're going to be moving a bit slowly because the slope or the gradient is not very steep. We can compare this to another situation where we increase the difference in the number of particles between the 2 areas. Now we have 18 on one side and still the remaining 4 on the other. So what this does is it creates a very steep gradient. So if we compare this now to the slide, the child who is sliding down the slide is going to be moving much faster down the slide because the slope of the line, or the slope on the graph, or the steepness of the gradient, all of those things mean the same, is so much more. So therefore the diffusion of the molecules in our second diagram will happen much faster due to the fact that there is a greater concentration gradient between the 2 spaces. Okay, so the greater the concentration gradient, or the greater the difference between the 2 areas, the faster diffusion will occur. All right, let us look at temperature. We've talked about temperature in a previous video, but we can see here that according to our thermometers, we've got thermometers of varying temperatures, that molecules will move faster when there is a higher amount of thermal energy in their environment. And so that's just what's depicted here. So for the molecules which are there in color, We can see their type of movement happening. If we increase the thermal energy, we will see much faster random motion, called Brownian motion, with those same molecules. So the higher the temperature, the faster the rate of diffusion will be. Okay, and that is because the thermal energy is converting to kinetic energy, and that is what is allowing the molecules to move. So the higher the temperature, the faster the kinetic energy, and therefore faster diffusion of the molecules. Finally, we get to surface area. So we're going to look at the root surface cells where molecules would diffuse in, whether it's mineral ions or water. And so if we have a plain cell without the extension of the surface area, then the surface area in this case, according to the measurements in the little doodle, is 8. Now, if we take a root hair cell, which increases the surface area of the cell, we can see that that increasing has doubled the diffusion surface area to 16. So there is more area for water and mineral ion molecules to move across. And so if we have increased number of molecules that can move at a single moment, then the rate of diffusion also has increased. So this snapshot of the root surface cells on the left side, 8 molecules have moved across, comparatively to the 16 molecules that have moved across the root hair cell due to the increase in the surface area of that cell. So we're just looking at like a snapshot of that moment. So all of these 4 factors, depending on how they work together, can really create a very fast rate of diffusion, or if we don't have optimal conditions, a slow rate of diffusion. So it's important for you to know all of those differences and how molecules would move faster in order to create a situation where the organism is getting the molecules faster. And remember, the importance of that is for the organism to stay alive.